Welcome back to Checkmate with Blake. Today I have another special video for you all. We're going to be talking about an opening that you can play against d4, which means that you can play it against the Queen's Gambit, which is d4 and c4. You can play it against the London system. You can play it against any d4 opening. And what is that opening I'm talking about? We're talking about the King's Indian defense. Why is this opening so special? Well, this opening is an opening, as I said, that you can play against any d4 response. So that means that it's a system opening that you can learn and pretty much play the same moves every time. There's only a few ideas that you really have to know in the King's Indian defense. But as always, we're going to cover all variations. We're going to make sure that you all are very well prepared. Another reason this opening is so special is because I don't play the King's Indian defense myself. So I had a subscriber request who wanted to see this opening. So of course I did my research. I went and looked through the lines. I watched some videos and I made sure I was well prepared. Of course I know much of the King's Indian theory. It's just not my specific style of playing chess. That doesn't mean though that it's not a good opening. It's an excellent opening, and there's many times that I play the ideas of the King's Indian. So even if you don't play the King's Indian and you don't want to play it, this video will show you some of the ideas that you should know in other common positions. Because if you don't know the King's Indian, I'll show it in just a second. But of course, you have your bishop fianchettoed here, and that's a very simple idea, but that's an idea that you'll have in many positions. If you're a beginner, this is something that will teach you how to play chess on a broader level, even if you decide not to play the King's Indian defense. Now, in my journey to try and learn more about the King's Indian, that being the specific variations that you have to know, I found that online there's not a lot of posted content about how to play this opening. There's many videos you can find of people playing it in a game and then talking about it, but there's not many opening videos posted. So I hope that if you decide to play the King's Indian, this video really helps you. And I'll also kind of teach you how to study openings, because I'll show you that if you don't know a specific line or you want to learn more about a specific line, I'll show you in this video how to do that. But without any further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. And if you haven't subscribed, hit that subscribe button. It really helps a lot. It helps the channel grow, and it encourages me to make more content that you all like. And as always, if you want to see other content, other videos, other openings, just leave it in the comments. I'll make those videos as well. But basically, the King's Indian defense starts after this move d4, of course, and we actually play this move knight f6. So of course this kind of encourages white, because they want to play the Queen's Gambit, for example. We're just gonna use the Queen's Gambit video in this, or example in this video. But let's say that they play the move c4, because they're kind of anticipating maybe you're going to go e6 and go into this d5 line. But regardless, c4 is what you're typically going to find. I mean, if you're playing white even in this position, what would you play? Obviously c4 makes a lot of sense. You want to get this knight here and you want to control the center. So c4 makes a lot of sense anyways. Even if you're not familiar with the Queen's Gambit, it just makes a lot of sense to kind of control the center. But here's the position where you actually just go ahead and immediately go pawn g6. Pawn g6 is designed to go ahead and get your bishop out on this diagonal. Get it fianchetto is what it's called when you get on this diagonal. And now they're going to play this move knight c3 to just kind of try and further contest the center. They're going to get a pawn here and thinking they're going to just go ahead and attack you already. So you go ahead with this move knight g6, or bishop g6, bishop g7 anyways. And now after they play this move e4, trying to go ahead and fight for the center. At this point, and at this point only, do you play the move d6. d6 is simply designed to go ahead and stop this pawn push, okay? So before I cover any variations, I want to go ahead and talk about briefly why you play the King's Indian. So for example, in this position, the most common moves you're going to find are knight f3 or bishop e2. But so before we cover any variations, I'm just going to show this. Let's say knight f3 and castles. Why would you play the King's Indian defense? Well, first of all, notice your safety. Notice how if they try to attack you, for example, this knight covers this square, so any kind of queen getting in and knight getting in, well, the knight's already covering this. The bishop also covers these squares too. So what you'll notice is your king is super strong, because also late game, let's say that you could somehow get this bishop trade off the knight. Let's say every pieces are off the board. Well, now your king can go up to this square and move without having to waste a move such as h6 to try and prevent any back rank checkmate. So you just have a ton of defensive weapons, but more importantly, your bishop is actually super strong. Your bishop is probably your best piece, which is why I want to show in this video why you need to keep your bishop at all times. So your bishop eyes down this diagonal, which oftentimes creates a lot of pressure for black, or for white, because you're going to try and attack on the queen side. You're going to try and play moves like c5. You're going to try and break open on the queen side, or in certain cases, you're actually going to attack by going, for example, e5 and trying to go for this f4 push. So just to quickly summarize, while you're watching this video, just what you need to look for is if you're in a closed position, I recommend trying to fight with f5 and potentially this move c5. if you're in an open position, let's say they don't close it, and I'll explain all this later. But if they don't close the center, I like this move e5, trying to break open the center and using your bishop late game. So I'll talk about all those concepts. If you've never played the King's Indian defense and you're wanting to play it, watch throughout the whole video because there's a lot of variations you just need to be familiar with. Again, this opening kind of avoids a lot of theory because you know that you're going to play e5. You know you might be able to get f5 in and maybe c5 at some point, but watch it so you know the actual variations because it's different in different positions. But we're going to go back because you may be wondering, well, can't white just go ahead and attack our center anyways? Can't they go ahead and attack this knight? Because after we trade and they trade, they're going to be attacking our knight. Well, I'll go ahead and show that line first. So, for example, e5, as it shows, is already a mistake. And the reason being is after we capture back and they capture, yes, they're attacking our knight. However, what we do is we queen trade immediately. Now, go ahead and pause this, try and figure out what would you play here, right? Because if you think, oh, well, I'll just take with the king, well, now knight g4 comes in. Notice you're actually attacking this pawn and threatening a fork of the king and the rook. So automatically, let's say they play this move bishop e3, for example, to go ahead and cover this pawn, prevent any kind of fork. Well, now you just capture here. Notice you're actually up a pawn and white can't castle. They have this king in this weak square. You're going to castle on your very next move, and white can't castle, and you're up a pawn. So, of course, they can't take that way. Well, you might be saying, well, Blake, that's silly. Of course, they're going to capture back with the knight, so that you don't have the same idea of this fork. And, now you think, well, if I just play knight g4 now, well, white's just going to play f4. Exactly. So we're not going to go down that line. Instead, what we're going to play is this move knight fd7. We're attacking this pawn again. Notice we're attacking it twice, actually. So if they were to just develop a knight, we would just capture it. So instead, they're going to play f4 here, thinking, okay, everything's great. Now you play this move f6, which is a reason behind this opening. You have f6, you have f5, you have both alternatives. Here it's pretty obvious why they can't push the pawn, and that's because if they push to attack it, well, first of all, you could always just go knight c5, and you're already attacking it again. So you're attacking it already twice. You're going to win this pawn back, but you don't even have to play that. For example, the engine actually likes this move knight b6, but I just want to illustrate how it's so easy to go ahead and win this pawn. I mean, you're going to win no matter what. I mean, even here, if they were to go f5, well, you're just going to capture it and win this on the very next move, too. So, obviously, they can't do that, so instead they're most likely going to trade down. You take back with the knight, and now just look at this position. You have a knight developed, you have a bishop looking down this way, and all they have are two pawns that are just in the middle of the board, seemingly doing nothing, right? Because they're not really controlling that many great squares. Meanwhile, you're ready to castle. Of course, you have a great position. You're up 0.79, according to the engine. So obviously, they simply cannot go for this early pawn push because if they do, of course, you're just going to go down those variations I've shown, and you're going to win here. So let's say that they don't do that. White knows what they're doing. They're not going to play any kind of silly mistakes early in the opening, and they just go knight f3, further controlling the center. You go ahead and castle, and the game's going to continue like this here. So if you're playing white, you can try and pause, try and see what you want to do. Notice I want to point out, though, this move bishop d3, which is pretty common in most white setups, is actually not the correct move because you're going to strike in the center here, and this bishop is going to be looking at pawns. It's going to be a horrible bishop. So there's another reason to play it, because if you're playing white, it's easy to make mistakes. But let's just say this move bishop e2, which is actually the best move. So I'm pointing out it's the best move in this position. But again, a lot of people will actually play this move bishop d3. Here, though, you strike with your plan. So notice they've put these pawns here to stop us from playing this move e5, and we play it anyways. If we don't care, we're going to play e5. So in this position, you can look at it now. First of all, we're threatening to capture it because we want to remove their center, maybe put a rook over here. So it makes a lot of sense for them to actually capture with the pawn here. Notice it's a book move. It does say castling's the best, but of course, as I said, if they castle, notice the second top move is to just go ahead and capture and try and attack their center. You're going to have a great game. In fact, your bishop is going to be more alive without this pawn here. So the book move is actually recommends white to capture this pawn, and to that response, you're going to capture back, offering a queen trade. Now, if they queen trade, you may look at this and say, well, now we're hanging this pawn in the center of the board. So, yeah, we have a rook on an open file, but it doesn't matter. But, of course, if they capture this with knight takes e5, we capture this pawn. Notice we're completely gambiting this knight. But if they take it, we will win their knight. And if you just pause and look at this position, again, we have a bishop that's great right now, and we have, more importantly, a rook on an open file, and we're castled with a safe square for our king. And this knight here, although it's in the center of the board, is fairly weak. So we could just say, for example, castling. This move f5, you kind of already have already. I'm not saying exactly to play f5 here. We could just look at some of the top moves because I didn't go a ton in depth with this line. But for example, f5, they're going to go c5. So you're not going to play that just yet. But my point being is, like, let's say you just develop normally. f5 is going to, attacking this knight is just going to kick it away at some early point. So obviously we have a great position here. Of course it's fairly even, so I don't want to say that we're crushing or we're this super advantage, but of course we have an excellent position, which is exactly what you want as black. You want to try and find an opening that gives you an equal position, if not a winning position. So there's just that tactic you should know, which will come alive in multiple variations. So if you're playing this opening, just know that this tactic is there, that you can always capture this pawn with the discovery here if they ever go down that line. But even if they don't, let's say in this position they realize that you have this tactic, which I doubt they realize it, but if they do and they just castle here, you have other ideas. You have bishop g4, I want to point out, as the top move, but a very simple way to play would simply just be to develop the knight, go knight c6. Go ahead and cover this and kind of create some ideas of putting the knight here on d4. I want to point out in this line too, if they ever try and remove this knight, so let's say I capture this pawn, like let's say they play the move a3, I'm just going to point out some kind of random moves to just show a little bit of developing. So for example, such as bishop e6, and then they try to play this move bishop b4 or pawn b4, trying to attack this knight. The move I want to illustrate is that you always have this move knight d4, which now is threatening to take this with a check. So of course, a lot of times, whether they go back here or they capture, are two lines that you got to look at. But if they go back here, for example, we'll just look at some of these. Notice if they go back, notice now that their bishop doesn't cover this pawn, so you could simply take and attack the rook. So instead, they may say, let's go ahead and capture here immediately, but then we take back with the e pawn, attacking this knight. Let's just say the knight goes to d5, for example. Automatically, you could capture this pawn. But for example, let's just say we capture here. What you have is you have this pawn. I'm just trying to illustrate this idea because I don't want to make like exact lines you have to memorize. I'm just trying to illustrate some of the ideas. Is that this pawn will be able to push up the board, and then for example, this bishop will become super strong. So let's just say a random move, okay? Like let's just say h3, just for the point of the video. You actually have an attack here where you could attack this bishop and attack this rook. So of course you're completely crushing. I will say crushing in this position. And yes, they're attacking this pawn, but it's not really that big of a threat. So like even if, let's say we take, and even if they were to take here, first of all, a simple move would just be to go ahead and go something like this. But notice that's actually a miss, because what you actually have to do is still play this move d3, kind of gambiting this. But then after you take here, notice you're attacking the rook and attacking this other rook and attacking the knight. So of course you're completely crushing here as well. So we're going to go back here. Let's see where we were exactly in this video, because that was a pretty deep line that we covered. Let's say in this position, though, that they decide to go ahead and capture here now, rather than trading queens first. Well, what you do, it's pretty simple. You just trade queens, and after they take back, you can still do this simple tactic where you take, you gambit your knight, but you win theirs. So just to kind of illustrate that line so that you're prepared for both, and if you had any questions, hopefully that answered it. We'll go back to more of a standard position because that, again, e5, I just want to show, again, just to illustrate the point, e5 is what you want to play in this position. You want to try and break open the center despite the fact that they look like they have so many attackers, because you have some hidden threats here. So e5 is what you want to play. But let's go back. I want to talk about some more things that you might find. There's this 4 pawns attack that you should know, where white puts 4 pawns. It's a great way to play against the King's Indian because, they have great control of the center. However, we're just going to continue our development as normal. We're going to castle. And if they try here an early pawn push, just to illustrate it again, well, what we'll do is we'll take, and obviously they'll take back with this pawn because they don't want to not be able to castle. So they're going to take back with the f pawn. And here the move I recommend is just knight go to fd7, or knight fd7. And here they're going to probably play this move knight f3 to further just solidify their center. And here's where you strike with this move c5. So c5, of course, is designed to go ahead and kind of threaten this pawn, because if we could remove this pawn, right, we're going to easily win this one in the center too, and then we're just going to be up, and we're going to be completely crushing. So actually the top engine move that's recommended, or one of the top moves, is d5, but that actually hangs a pawn. I just want to point it out. So the best move is to give up one of white's pawns. I mean, that doesn't seem that great, right? So instead, They may not do that. A logical move would be to capture, thinking, okay, well, I can't hold these, so I'm just going to give it away. But if they capture, first of all, just notice we're going to win this pawn. And even after this queen trade, um, notice we're just completely winning here. We're up 1.59 according to the engine. So um, they won't probably do that. Or, I mean, they might, but, you know, we're completely crushing in there. So a move you might see is bishop e3, and it says it's a mistake, but if you're playing white here, what would you play to try and hold this position? Bishop e3 is logical because at least you're threatening to win this pawn, but now we're just going to go ahead and capture back, and this move knight c6 comes in. Notice we just have a ton of attackers on this pawn. Like if they were to play a random move, we're just threatening to go ahead and capture here, and actually there's a hidden tactic where you can go ahead and capture this knight on e5, even though it looks like it's attacked twice. Notice if they take with the knight, we'll win the queen. So obviously they can't do that, and if they instead, obviously they take with the queen, we'll take with the bishop. So instead they might try to go ahead and rook trade, or queen trade, and now if they take again, you have a very similar position. So I just want to point out how that's completely crushing after knight c6. Of course, I'm showing it after a mistake of going bishop e3 here to cover this pawn. But even if we look at some of the best lines, like I said, the best line is to give up the pawn. There's also ideas such as giving up the pawn this way. Really, white can't hold it very well in this position. Bishop f4 would be a nice try. Feel free to look at these lines. And this is why I was going to teach you guys a little bit about how to study openings, because there are so many lines in this King's Indian defense that you have to know. For example, like, could they play bishop f4? Do they play bishop e3? I don't want you to memorize each one of these lines. I want you to be prepared against the common ideas in each line. That's why you should watch the video the whole way through, so you have an idea of it. But let's say you're playing a game and I don't cover this move bishop f4 because I wasn't planning on covering it. What you'll do is, so like we'll go ahead and look at this example right here. So they play bishop f4. How do you learn how to play against this? How do you study this? Without, let's say it's not covered in the opening videos, and there's not a lot of King's Indian videos anyway, so it may not be. Well, what I'll do is if I'm trying to learn this opening is I'll stop here and I'll say, okay, they play this move bishop f4. The engine doesn't like it. It says it's a good move. Why is it a good move? Because we can take the pawn here. Okay, well, what's that matter? They're just going to take back with the queen. We look at, okay, we'll play knight c6. That's the top move. And consider some of the other ones as well, because this is how you learn. And then let's just say you think, well, they're just going to go back here. Well, now notice we have a ton of pressure on this pawn, and actually we can capture here with that similar tactic of looking at the queens. And if they capture down, you're like, okay, well, now I've got this great position here. So that's how you study lines. That's how you realize why, for example, bishop f4 might not be the move. And if you have any questions, you say, okay, well, let's play the best line. Let's see what they play here. And then just go down these lines and figure out what you think. But I'm not going to go through each line because this video is already going to be kind of long, and I don't want to make it excessively long. So that's why they can't do this early pawn push, just going back. So let's say that they instead go knight f3. Okay, here's the point in the video where you have two options, and this is a point where you need to watch because you need to know what are your two options. c5 and e5. e5 is what I want you to play. e5 is what I recommend. Again, it'll say c5 is the best. Play what you'd like, but I recommend e5 because now after this capture, we go down this line, okay? If they take with the pawn, you go ahead and you do this queen trade. Now notice I talked about earlier, the best move is actually to take with the king, but they're not going to play it because if they take with the king, you're going to immediately look at this and say, I'm threatening a fork and I'm going to threaten to win this pawn again. They're probably not going to play that. To be honest with you, I think that they're going to go ahead and capture with the knight, to which you'll just go ahead and take the center pawn. You have pressure here, and if they ever go and attack your knight, well, you're just going to go knight c5, they're going to drop back, and you're going to, for example, play rook e8, and you're just going to completely win this pawn too. Even if they try and hold it, first of all, I just want to point out it's pinned, so they really can't. But like if you were to go f6, they can't even take. But you just can go ahead and play knight c6. You're going to win this pawn. You're going to crush in this position as well. So let's go back and say, well, what if they capture instead after this? And we take back, they take with the knight. This is a little more tricky. Now it says it's a mistake, and it is a mistake, but it's a little trickier to know. So now you play c5. That's why I recommend playing e5 first, is kind of reserving c5 as an option later. And here it's tricky, right? Because what can they play, right? You're threatening to go ahead and capture this pawn. We'll look at some of the top lines here, but let's just say bishop e3, which is, I imagine, is what you're going to find most of the time. I recommend queen a5. Queen a5 is simply designed, so like let's say they just develop normally, like bishop e2. It's actually designed to go ahead and take, and after they take back, it's actually to capture this pawn. Okay, and you may look at this and say, well, now we're not attacking this the same way. But we are, because if they take back, Well, they can't take back. Sorry, they can't take back because it's pinned. Sorry, I didn't mean that in this exact spot. But what we're threatening ideally is actually to win these pieces here. So we'll just go through some of the top lines. Let's say they drop back, for example. You have this move here, pinning the rook, or using the rook to pin the bishop to the queen, with some attacks here. But again, I'm not going to go super in depth with this because it can be very, very complicated. For example, Queen A4 is actually what the engine likes as the top move, but you're just going to capture, and then you're going to take the center here with or pawn takes D4, and then you just go ahead and capture this pawn in the center. So although I'm not covering these lines super specifically, that's mostly because if you go down these exact lines, like the chances that your opponent plays the 4 pawns attack, are probably fairly high, but the chances that they go down these specific lines are probably not super high. So instead, I recommend getting an idea of the lines, and then trying to study them if you decide to play it. So again, we'll go c5, and then they'll probably play this move bishop e3. For example, if they were to capture here, I recommend, again, just go ahead and queen trading and then winning the center pawn, or going for that knight g4 attack. So those are the ideas I want you to know. And for example, if they were to try to push the pawns, well, you already notice you have this idea. If you've been watching, you notice you have this idea where if they take, you're just going to take here. But you don't even have to do that. After they take, you always have ideas, sneaky ideas too, such as you could just play rook e8. Rook e8, if they go back, of course, you're going to take here, threatening a discovered attack, right? So if they play nothing, you're going to take here with check, and you notice you're attacking the queen too. So you're going to win the queen here. But of course, they're going to take here. You're going to take, and you're just going to have a good game here. You're up 1 point of material. It says it's actually a miss. Apparently, the move f5 is actually the move you need to play in this position. But this kind of goes to point out, f5 is a hidden idea that you need to play in a lot of these positions. Is f5, break open the center, and in this position you have your rook, which is just amazing. Just kind of preparing to attack with the rook as well. So there are a few other things real quick I want you to know. Because of course we're covering some of the most common things. The moves that make a lot of sense, a lot of people will try this move bishop e3, and after you castle, they're going to play, for example, queen d2. And their idea is they're going to go here and try and trade off your strong bishop, especially intermediate players are going to try this. Instead, I recommend going knight g4, because now if they try this push with this bishop play to try and win your piece, well, notice obviously you're just going to win a whole piece here, so they can't do that. And more importantly, after they, for example, try to kick your piece away, you're actually the goal of knight g4 is to trade for their bishop. So now they cannot remove this bishop. That's what you want. That's why anytime, that they try this battery where they're building up these 2 pieces to try and remove your bishop, just play knight g4, try and get rid of their battery, try and get rid of their light square or their dark squared bishop. Just trade it away the first chance you get. That's what I recommend if they try that. And they're not always going to play these exact 2 moves, but so like let's say that they've thrown in some random moves. Like let's say they've thrown in this bishop d3 move. Let's say we've thrown in some random moves and they go for this idea here. Knight g4 is pretty much automatic. Just play knight g4, get rid of their piece. Going back here, there are some lines, let's say after castles. Sorry. There's this move f3. That's what I'm going to talk about. f3. You castle, and notice now, this is called the Samisch Variation. So I want you to know about the Samisch Variation. I recommend just continuing your plan as normal. I recommend just going e5 and just trying to play your plan as usual. So for example, the move bishop d3 or bishop e3, regardless what they play, bishop e3 is the best move. You just go e5, you break open the center. If they want a queen trade, obviously your rook is going to be great. They can't castle. Yes, the position looks a little cramped for you, but it's also cramped for them. Notice they can't bring their knight out here. Their bishop is staring at nothing, and they can't even castle. So, of course, you're winning in that position. But even if they don't decide to queen trade, which notice queen trading is the best move, like let's say they just go for a random move here as well. You can always consider queen trading, although I don't necessarily recommend it. For example, this position, it actually recommends to move your queen to e7 and then probably bring your rook over here and attack with the open file as well. So the point of the Samish for us, for playing the King's Indian, is I want you to try and make this f3 move a big weakness. I want you to make basically them not be able to develop their knight here, which they naturally want to do. And all you do is you just play this move e5 and you just completely try and eliminate the reason behind this move f3, which is really a kingside attack. But by playing this move e5, notice now their knight can't develop. So you kind of just accomplished everything you want. You're up 0.6. You can't ask for anything more for that. And the last thing I want you to know about, well, actually, I need to cover one thing real quick. Before I go to this very last thing. So in this position, which I don't think I've talked about just yet. So after we castle, and obviously we want to play this move e5. Let's just say they play bishop e2. We're going down the standard lines. So if you're watching this video and you've gotten all the way this far, you kind of get to see now what happens in the closed positions. So if e5 happens and they go for this closed position of d5, your new goal now shifts, right? Because they declined your e5 push, your pawn break. So now your goal shifts, okay? Now you want to try and attack this pawn using f5 and potentially even c5 at some point to try and break open their center. So in this position, if they try to close the pawn, the move I recommend playing immediately is a5. Now, a5 is designed because notice in this position, if you're playing wide, if you're experienced, they're going to try and open up the queen side. They're going to try and attack over here. So you use a5 to kind of stop this pawn push. Now, let's say castles, you play this move knight a6. Knight a6 designed to reroute the knight over here. The best move they can play here is bishop e3. But a lot of players will miss this because they won't know this theory. They won't know this idea. And they might just play a random move like a3, preparing this move b4. Now you play this move knight c5. Notice you have two attackers. You're threatening to win this pawn already. You have a great position. There's really nothing to go super in depth with. Just to give you a brief summary, you want to get your bishop developed here. Consider breaking open with c6 at some point. Get your, let's say, your queen to e7, just an example, and then try and play f5 at some point too. So this is just a brief analysis of it. But if they, for example, play the more correct move, we'll go back and they'll play bishop e3, get your knight here, further attack the center. If they trade, you take back with the pawn. And notice now this pawn's a weakness. For example, on the very next move, like let's say they play nothing, on the very next move, you can consider c6 already. It says it's an inaccuracy, so maybe not exactly here. But the idea being is if they try and push, you're going to try and add pressure to it. And if they take, obviously, then they don't have a good center anymore, so you're perfectly fine here. So we'll just go through some of the most played lines here, such as queen e7. That makes a lot more sense now. I see why it wants us to wait, because let's say they play a random move. You could put your rook over here. But again, notice there's no rush. Actually, there's no rush to try and play this move c6, so you can kind of wait. But just to illustrate the idea that c6 already breaks open the center. But even if you don't, notice you have great control of these squares. They're going to struggle with a pawn break. And your knight still is attacking here. You can still bring your other bishop. You can still play this move bishop d7. So that's just what happens if you play with closed positions, is you're trying to ultimately play f5 when you get a chance, maybe c5, and play this move a4 to just kind of cut off their attacks. The last thing I want you to know is kind of how I play against the King's Indian defense, and I want you to just be prepared for it. So oftentimes here, let's say after bishop e2 and castles, there's this move you might find, which is h4. They're going for an early kingside attack. Now here the top move is h5, but I recommend an in-between move. I recommend the move e5. It says it's an accuracy, but I'm going to illustrate why. If they go ahead and push with h5, which a lot of players would, well, notice when you capture here now, you're attacking their knight, you're making them waste a move. First of all, yeah, they can capture back with the queen, but notice here you're just completely crushing, right? Because you can take this pawn with an attack on the queen. I don't want to say crushing. I'll take that back. You're winning, but you can attack the queen and you attack this pawn. So you're kind of asking questions. And for example, if they go knight d5, notice this pawn hangs. And even if they don't, like let's say, I don't know, we'll try and find some other ideas, such as knight b5. First of all, you have c5 to solidify the center. So obviously they can't rush with this pawn push. They really need to waste a tempo, right? So in this position, they need to decide what they're going to do. For example, if they trade down, they could, yes, trade your queens here. But now notice you've traded their queens off the board, so they don't have as much firepower to try and break open this kingside. So this h4 push is kind of proving to be, what's the purpose? I mean, yes, you might break through here. Maybe. I mean, I have a ton of defenders. But if you do, you don't even have your queens, and my queen is on an open file. But just to give you guys a brief idea, because again, this video is more about the ideas. If you're not a fan of this h5 idea, or even if you are, what you also can play here is this move h5, just kind of completely, weaken their attack here. Because notice you have a lot of protection on this square, so it's going to be harder for them to break open. So h5 just makes a lot of sense. But again, I recommend this in-between move, e5, simply because you kind of force them to waste a move. For example, they might want to close this position here, which is the best. This is the best move in this spot. But now you can play h5, and you've closed it off. Notice you have these pawns here that are pretty strong, and your bishop is still open. There's really no significant issues. But just to kind of summarize this video, because I know this video is taking a lot longer than most videos, but it's simply because there's so many variations to try and cover. But I hope you guys found this enjoyable. Again, the ideas behind the King's Indian defense, just to summarize, is you want to play e5. You want to break open with e5, and if that doesn't work, if they close your position, ultimately you're going to try for this f5 attack. You're going to try and break open here, or you're going to try for a4 or a5. But really, f5 and e5 are the two I want you to know. The King's Indian, you play it because it's so strong. It's such a, it's kind of defensive, which is not really my style. But, if you're a defensive kind of player and you're wanting something you can play against d4, of course, this opening works against pretty much all d4 openings. And the ideas are simple. You're going to play this tricky move e5, and notice in all positions, it looks like the e5 pawn can be captured when, of course, it can't. But f5 is also an attack that you want to try and do too. So I hope you guys found this video pretty enjoyable. If you like it, leave a comment, give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And as always, if you have any content you'd like to see, request any specific content in the comments section, and I can make videos on that stuff for you guys too. Thank you all for watching.